Sorry about that. It's been a long day. We had a board meeting this morning. We'll try again. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It is our last public meeting for the Chastain Road LCI corridor study. We've had fantastic input all along the way and have been working hard with Gresham Smith to come up with some innovative ideas along this corridor that is critically important to our district. So thank you again. We're going to jump right to it. I'm going to turn it over to Erin Thorenson and let her and her team take it from there. Erin.
Great. Thank you so much, Tracy. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to go through just a brief housekeeping and overview of the meeting. We'll talk a little bit about the corridor study for those that haven't been able to keep up with our study so far. And we'll recap a little bit of what we heard during our previous virtual meeting earlier this summer. And then we'll walk you through a selection of our draft recommendations for the corridor study and talk a little bit about our next steps. So for using your Zoom controls, there are a couple of options for entering questions using the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen there. You can watch for some messages from the host during the meeting in the chat screen, and you have audio controls there as well. And toward the end of the study, we will also have an interactive polling question. We'll be looking for your feedback and input about some of the recommendations that you hear today. And so we'll ask you if you have a mobile device handy or another laptop or tablet, you could go to menti.com and input the code 6331020. And we'll get to that toward the end of the presentation. Like I said, we'll display those numbers again, but that's an option there for you to provide some comments along the way. So the LCI corridor study is funded through the Livable Centers initiative of the Atlanta Regional Commission, which focuses on helping create vibrant, walkable communities with a variety of transportation options and improving access to jobs and services. The Town Center CID has a number of strong foundational studies and plans that have really laid the groundwork for this study as well as others to come. That includes the CID's master plan, which is currently undergoing an update, along with projects like the Skip Span Connector, the Noonday Creek Trail, and a number of other previous corridor studies and projects that are going on throughout the district. We're also taking cues from Cobb County's comprehensive plan and really looking to build on that as we move forward with this study. Here's just an overview of the study corridor. You can see where Chastain Road lies in the kind of northern arc there of the Town Center CID. Our corridor study boundaries start at Big Shanty Road on the west and end at Bells Ferry Road on the east, crossing both I-75 and 575. The purpose of the study is to focus on walkability and creating a vibrant, walkable district, taking advantage of and leveraging smart technology for improvements to travel and mobility for all users of the corridor. And we really are seeking here to link the KSU campus to Bells Ferry Road and all along Chastain Road, creating a diverse mix of office, retail, dining, and entertainment options. So we're focused on a series of improvements that will improve conditions for biking, walking, driving, and ensuring that people feel safe and comfortable as they're doing so. Some of the goals that we have identified throughout the course of this project in conjunction with our stakeholder committee and based on input from community members and the Town Center CID staff are really focused on connecting people and places. So strengthening that connectivity, improving access and connections to the regional trail system, to adjacent businesses, the surrounding neighborhoods, and nearby attractions. We're also looking at improving safety and operations along the corridor. So not just for vehicular travel, but also for people biking and walking and leveraging technology to do that. So through a series of infrastructure improvements and also taking advantage of connected signal technology and other programs forthcoming to make improvements to the roadway itself. And another key goal is to create a sense of place, kind of creating a vibrant, public open space using wayfinding to enhance the experience of getting around and through the area. We're also thinking about how this study can help increase economic vitality along Chastain Road as well as throughout the district. So identifying and prioritizing key opportunity sites for strategic redevelopment and attracting and retaining the kinds of businesses and developments that support a strong economy. I mentioned technology before. That's another key component of this is leveraging forthcoming applications of connected signal technology, incorporating usable technology into Streetscape for wayfinding and signage, and really thinking about how we can leverage that technology to improve safety. And last but not least, we're also really trying to set a sustainable framework for this study. So thinking about guidelines for context-sensitive development in the future and identifying policy changes that can help shape the future redevelopment to kind of create that sense of place and achieve these other goals that we're pursuing. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Megha, to talk a little bit about our previous virtual public forum.
Thanks, Erin. So at the last virtual public forum in July, we presented potential improvements across 4 categories: transportation, mobility, technology and smart communities, land use and redevelopment, and urban design and placemaking. And among these, participants showed the greatest interest in urban design and placemaking, as well as bike and ped improvements for Chastain Road. Some of the ideas that resonated most with people were having more parks and green space together, enhancing the streetscape with amenities like benches and shade features, expanding the trail network, and improving pedestrian safety for walking along and crossing Chastain Road. Some additional ideas that resonated with participants across all categories were the need for better signal timing, digital wayfinding, smart pedestrian safety features, electric vehicle charging stations, and also more mixed-use development. The public also had the opportunity to highlight some opportunities and concerns on Chastain Road through an online interactive map. Here's just a sampling of what we heard. Some of the opportunities people pointed out were places for pocket parks potentially, the need to preserve environmentally sensitive areas, and there was also some discussion on better maintaining the existing bike lanes or converting them to a multi-use path. Some of the concerns noted were weaving traffic, unsynchronized traffic signals, and also the difficulty for KSU students to safely cross Chastain Road.
Great, thank you, Megha.
Sure.
So with that, we're going to actually launch into talking about the draft recommendations for the study. And we'll present these in a series of categories, but it's really important to note at this point that there's a lot of overlap between all of these categories, and everything really is intended to kind of roll up and feed into each other. So they really build on one another. And while it's helpful to kind of separate things into the categories for the purposes of a presentation in this kind of a forum, it's really also important to understand that everything is interrelated and that the transportation and mobility improvements feed into the streetscape improvements, which take advantage of technology and really can help inform redevelopment overall. So as we move forward and talk through these, just keep that in mind that this is, these are all really kind of building on one another. And also that this is we're really at kind of a stage here where we are presenting a series of options. And this is a planning study, and that, going forward over time, as the CID chooses to implement some of these recommendations in partnership with Cobb County and other jurisdictions, that there's more work, needed to kind of refine and develop concepts and designs for some of the transportation improvements. And that we're really kind of in this draft recommendations phase here, and we're looking for your input on these as we move forward. In terms of transportation and mobility, we've kind of divided things into corridor-wide improvements, emphasis on bicycle and pedestrian improvements. We'll show you kind of how those feed into the roadway configuration, and also a series of intersection improvements. Throughout the corridor, a couple of recommendations that really apply at multiple locations throughout the corridor at key intersections and along the main line of Chastain Road, is to implement flashing yellow arrows for permissive left turns, make sure that traffic signals have retroreflective borders on the signal backplates, improving safety by adding retroreflective treatments to the median noses and also along the roadway, as well as signage and standard pedestrian enhancements, and also development of a multi-use path. So as you can see here, we're going to walk through a series of these, but the main thing that is important to note here is that what we're doing is proposing to repurpose the existing on-street bike lane and incorporate that into a multi-use path that would be along both sides of Chastain Road for some segments, and then along one side of Chastain Road for other segments. So what we would do is hold the center median in its current place, and then push out the outside curb to capture that existing on-street bike lane and use the available public rights-of-way to create a multi-use path. So what this does is provide a facility for people biking and walking on both sides of the road that is separated from the travel lanes by the curb, but also by a planted buffer strip, making it more comfortable for all users. The multi-use path would be bi-directional, so you can travel in either direction on either side of the road depending on where your destination or origin is. This is a view of what it might look like over I-75 on the existing bridge. The multi-use path narrows a little bit to fit within the existing width, but it still is able to accommodate some separation between the travel lanes and the multi-use path to try to make it feel a little bit more comfortable than current conditions. Continuing eastward, we're looking at the central portion of Chastain Road here. This is one of the widest segments of Chastain Road, and the recommendation for this segment would be to continue the multi-use path on both sides of the road up until the commons at Chastain Shopping Center. So you can see here we've got space for the planted buffer strip as well as lighting, the multi-use path on both sides of the road. And where the right-of-way can accommodate, we can incorporate pedestrian amenity nodes that would provide places for people to pull off and stop, get a drink of water, check their phone, etc. So we're trying to, provide some spaces for people to stop and rest periodically. We could include signage for wayfinding as well. And at this point in the corridor, we're suggesting that the multi-use path might switch to just one side of the road and be along the south side of Chastain Road here as you head east. This location was identified as a transition based on connections and linkages with proposed trails and creating better connectivity to the Noonday Creek Trail and other proposed trails that lie to the south of Chastain Road. As you continue eastward, we see a similar pattern here with a multi-use path on the south side of the road. This is able to fit within the bridge over I-575, accommodating both bicycles and pedestrians. And it should be noted that this is, just a kind of a proposed condition at this point. The exact configuration of any of these segments would depend on, what improvements are advanced in the intersection improvements that would be, incorporated into these projects as they move forward. In the eastern segment here on the east side of I-575, you can see it's a very similar kind of a condition. We're proposing a buffered, separated bike lane on the north side of the road where we're not having the multi-use path. That would be accompanied by a sidewalk, and then continuing the multi-use path on the south side of the road, again with a planted buffer strip and pedestrian amenities where there's space. So here's kind of an aerial view of where that multi-use path is proposed. You can see the white arrows represent some new or enhanced crossings across Chastain Road. And the reason the Chastain Meadows Parkway was chosen as kind of the end point for the multi-use path is based, as I said, on connectivity. As you can perhaps see in the dashed lines here, there are some proposed trails along Chastain Meadows Parkway and along Busbee Drive, and we have the multi-use path kind of continuing southward in those locations. So we're really designing this to be linked up with and provide those connections to those proposed other facilities. And at some point down the road in the future, if it makes sense to revisit that and consider a connection, all the way to Bells Ferry Road, that's something that the CID could certainly consider. Some of the reasons that we decided to terminate at Chastain Meadows Parkway is due to topography and some of the public rights of way constraints and the limited space that's available in those locations. And using Chastain Meadows would provide a direct connection down to the Noonday Creek Trail. As I had mentioned, we're also looking at a series of intersection improvements along the corridor. These would provide additional turn lanes, changes to signal phasing, retrofits at some locations where there's a higher frequency of pedestrians that cross Chastain Road that would remove the channelized right turns. We would also look at some restricted crossing U-turns that would streamline the turning movements at certain locations, eliminating the left turns from side streets, for example, with downstream U-turns. And we'd also have some pedestrian facility upgrades at each of these locations. So as these projects are advanced and move forward, there would be enhancements to the crosswalks and the pedestrian facilities at each of these locations. We're not going to go into the details of each of these recommendations, but there's some additional material that'll be available on the CID website following today's presentation, where you can learn a little bit more about each of these improvements. But we do want to highlight just a couple for you here today. One of the options that we're considering is a series of improvements at the interchange with I-575. So the first improvement would be an early off-ramp from southbound I-575. So what that would do is reduce the traffic volume on Chastain Road in that location by diverting folks that are headed southbound onto this early off-ramp that would tie into the intersection at Town Park Lane and Town Park Drive. There'd be some associated intersection improvements at that location to accommodate that. But by diverting those folks to that early off-ramp, you would reduce the likelihood of weaving movements, especially for people who are traveling southbound on 575 and then seeking to make a left turn at the next intersection here. We're also looking at providing an additional southbound lane here that would provide options for people to turn left, as well as to turn right, with a center lane that would be an option lane for either turning left or right. So you'd have one dedicated left turn lane, one dedicated right turn lane, and then an option lane in the middle that would allow you to turn in either direction. Another option that we're looking at for the interchange at 575 is to create a diverging diamond interchange in this location. A DDI has fewer potential conflict points than a conventional intersection, since it eliminates the need for left turn vehicles to cross the paths of approaching through vehicles. So by having the traffic cross to the other side of the road, you're streamlining the turning movements, reducing the potential for conflict points, as well as the severity of any potential conflicts. So what this does is shift the cross-street traffic to the left side of the road in between the signalized intersections. So vehicles turning left onto the on-ramps or off-ramps don't conflict with vehicles that are approaching from other directions.
Erin,
and it's important. Yes.
I'm gonna jump in real quick. We had a
Please.
request that could you either use the laser pointer function or even your cursor to kind of show where you're talking about in some of these directions.
Absolutely. Sure. Thanks for pointing that out.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Sure. So there's just an illustration here in the lower corner that kind of shows how the traffic shifts from one side to the other between the signalized intersections there. One point I did want to make about the diverging diamond interchange is that they really do provide good opportunities to integrate multimodal facilities. There are fewer traffic signal phases, and crossing distances are shortened so that pedestrians are only crossing one direction of traffic at a time. So this doesn't preclude or prohibit the inclusion of multi-use path or other types of bicycle and pedestrian facilities at this location. And the main advantage here, as I had mentioned earlier, is to reduce the weaving movements along Chastain Road. So we see a lot of people trying to cross Chastain Road to get to the other side in order to make turns onto side streets. And this will help eliminate some of that and reduce the potential conflicts at these turning points here. Do we have other questions at this point, Alicia?
Nope, no questions.
Okay, we'll continue on then. Our study, in addition to thinking about intersection improvements along Chastain Road, we're also thinking about some long-term considerations and what might help to improve conditions along Chastain Road and alleviate some of the pressure that Chastain Road currently experiences and is likely to continue experiencing in the future. So some of those long-term considerations include the possibility of creating a direct system-to-system interchange between I-75 and I-575 that would help take some of the pressure off of Chastain Road as well as other roads in the area that connect the two highways. Based on our team's analysis, there are approximately 10,000 vehicles per day that are traveling between 75 and 575, and they're either using Chastain Road or Barrett Parkway. So that would really provide some potential relief. And it's something that needs to be studied further, but it's definitely an option that we're recommending would be studied in the future. So moving into the realm of technology and smart communities, we're looking at a range of different options. So the team is considering ways to incorporate technology that will benefit people, whether they're biking, walking, driving, or traveling in other capacities. We looked at what technology already exists along the corridor. Traffic signals along Chastain Road are part of Cobb County's Coordinated Adaptive Traffic System, known as SCATS, which helps the county manage real-time timing of traffic signal phases at the different intersections along the corridor. And we know that there's a regional connected vehicle program that is being developed and implemented by GDOT and the Atlanta Regional Commission in partnership with local governments. So taking these factors into consideration, we wanted to see how we can best leverage that technology and what else we can recommend to complement that technology in order to improve operations and safety, as well as to just make it easier for people to get around and to help kind of create that sense of place that, that we're talking about creating along Chastain Road. So as I mentioned, all 13 traffic signals along Chastain Road, or signalized intersections rather, are going to be part of the Regional Connected Vehicle Program, that partnership between GDOT, ARC, and local governments. And this program will focus on deploying dedicated short-range communications, which will target deployment of applications like emergency vehicle preemption, so giving emergency vehicles priority at traffic signals, along with transit signal priority, which could help expedite transit travel along Chastain Road, or as vehicles like buses cross Chastain Road as well. And there's a possibility that down the road, this technology could be used to help vehicles detect pedestrians and crosswalks. And there's a whole host of other applications that could be explored in the future. Changeable message signs, some of which already exist in the vicinity of Chastain Road, can be used to provide alerts and information about travel conditions, about weather emergencies, and these can help people make decisions at points ahead of when they need to access the interstate system, for example. So that's another thing that we're considering as we move forward with the study, is having ways to kind of push out information in real time to drivers as they travel throughout the area. In addition to infrastructure on public roadways, we're also looking at possible applications in partnership with private entities, such as providing electric vehicle charging stations or encouraging those on private developments along the corridor. In addition to vehicle technology, we're also thinking about pedestrian technology and ways that technology can benefit people biking or walking along the corridor. So one example is what's known as a leading pedestrian interval, which is a Federal Highway Administration proven safety countermeasure. So they help reduce the likelihood of pedestrian vehicle crashes by providing a few seconds of walk time for pedestrians before the vehicles get their green signal. So that what that does is put the pedestrians out into the intersection before the vehicles make their through or turning movements, so that the drivers of those cars are more likely to see the pedestrians and reduce that potential for conflict there. We're also thinking about sensors that automatically would detect pedestrians that are crossing side streets along Chastain Road, so that you wouldn't necessarily have to push the push button to get the walk signal as a way to, again, kind of leverage technology and improve pedestrian safety. Our team is also recommending exploring a pilot project to look at lighted crosswalks for some of those locations near KSU's campus where you have a higher likelihood of pedestrians crossing Chastain Road. So there are several examples of these that are being used in other cities, and recently in the Atlanta region, the Aerotropolis Atlanta CIDs received a grant to explore something similar for this along Virginia Avenue. Another option that we're looking at in terms of pedestrian technology is the possibility of motion sensor lights along the multi-use path. So the example that's shown here is from the City of Atlanta's East Side Beltline Trail. And they are motion sensor LED lights that illuminate as you approach the lighting structure itself, the lamp post, and they'll light up kind of as people approach, and they'll stay on for a few minutes or a few seconds rather, and then they'll slowly kind of turn down, and the lighting gets dimmer as you pass by. So rather than a sudden flashing movement, it's much more subtle than that. But what that can do is provide enough illumination for pedestrians and bicyclists as they pass by, but not necessarily have lights shining directly at full capacity 24/7. And these could be put on timers so that they're responsive to time of day based on the seasons and based on daylight savings time and things like that. So with that, we're going to continue on. We have a couple more topics to cover, and then we'll pause for some questions as we get through the next few topics. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Erin Hathaway, to talk about urban design and placemaking.
Thanks, Erin. So we're going to walk through, like Erin said, a series of recommendations related to public space and development that prioritizes pedestrians and active sort of entertainment uses, really to strengthen this corridor as a destination. It aligns with the goals that we talked about at the beginning. These include short and long-term shared public open space, amenities along the corridor to support multi-mobility like streetscapes, as well as making sure infill supports the goals of this study. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick study to showcase what the streetscape could look like along Chastain corridor. Now we know that the CID has their own streetscape guidelines, and so we sort of are incorporating those into how we see Chastain with our multi-use path. So here is just an example of how that would look. We have the white band in the middle is where the multi-use path would run. The orange line is where the curb is bumped out. As Erin explained earlier, we're basically pushing the bicycle lane up behind the curb, so it gets us more space behind the curb. We have, suggested and recommended that stormwater be installed along between as a buffer. That way the water from the street can run off into a sustainable solution for filtering that stormwater before it goes into the system. We also show circles for where trees would be placed along the entire corridor to create a more shaded and pedestrian friendly experience. Again, we show light poles along the way as well. Generally, a pedestrian scale lighting would be about 50 feet on center. And so that's kind of how that would look like in space. We're also showing and recommending a series of pedestrian and bike scale signs to coexist with the vehicular wayfinding signs in the corridor and to complement those signs for those users that are on the sidewalk. Here we also show a little kind of space dedicated to what we call a mini park location. This would have amenities like benches and charging stations where if you're walking along the entire corridor, you have a moment to rest. We also have a line here indicating that, in the future, we really want to encourage connection between these public amenity sidewalks and development. That way pedestrians sort of have direct access into those development areas instead of having to use the roadway corridors to get to those. Next slide, please.
Mhm.
So as mentioned before, we're exploring and recommending pedestrian scale wayfinding signs to complement the vehicular signs that are out there now. Additionally, we've thought about how we could have technology wayfinding. These are some examples of how they are currently used, but we want to be a little bit considerate about where these might occur along the corridor. These would not be ones that would happen regularly, but they would be in very strategic, specific locations that could provide, information to pedestrians that are exploring the corridor, where sort of live events might be happening, or take advantages of different businesses, having different specials and whatnot. So those would be very strategic locations for the technology kiosks. Next slide, please. So additionally, as mentioned, if we think about redevelopment in the area and infill, we want to encourage, pedestrian-friendly development. So development that encourages a sense of place, a scale for people to walk around the corridor rather than just drive around the corridor. So that might mean, encouraging the parking lots to be behind the buildings, so that way pedestrians again can just access buildings directly on the streets. Encouraging things like bicycle racks and parking, and also carving out green space and public sort of park space within those redevelopments. We really have a lack of public green space right now within the study corridor. So we're really going to have to sort of weigh in on development in the future and encourage that open space, because we've heard a lot in the past throughout the study of how much that's a big desire for everyone. And
I'll just jump in here for 1 second, Erin. One of the questions that was asked a minute ago was about plans for connecting the businesses across the vegetative buffer to push into that space to kind of provide either more separation for cars or provide those direct connections between the businesses. And I know that's something that ties into some of these policy guidelines here. And I think we'll see an example of that a little bit later as we talk about one potential configuration of some of the development there.
That's right. And we talked to Cobb County Planning about their comprehensive plan, and basically, the way that we would recommend doing these guidelines is through the small area policy guidelines that get incorporated into the comp plan, sort of like on a yearly basis. Those are incorporated, and then it allows the CID to kind of encourage and discuss with development, this is sort of how we would like to see it. This is recommendations from us. And next slide, please. So, our team went through and looked at possible locations for redevelopment, basically spots that are prime and will likely get developed in the future. We've identified these, and really we want to influence and shape that development in a way that is consistent with the study and the study goals. It's a way to sort of attract the businesses and the uses that we want to see in the future.
I think it's important to note that part of this is not trying to be prescriptive about what must happen in these locations or what we think is even the best use and type. That's for developers in the development community to figure out what makes sense from the business perspective. But our main focus here is on trying to create the kind of environment that attracts the types of developments that will help support the overall vision for the study and really promote that kind of walkable district that we're looking for. And so what we've done, and I'll let Erin talk a little bit more about this is to try to illustrate some potential concepts for what that might look like, in terms of how it's configured in space, not focus so much on what goes in the buildings, but more about the form and how it can connect and accommodate some of the streetscape and the signage and the pedestrian amenities that we're thinking about.
That's right. And this series of slides is just an example of how, this lot could be developed in a way that supports the ideas in the study. So it's by no way means a prescriptive, but it's just exploring how this could look in the physical environment. So this first slide is really sort of about creating urban blocks, so splitting up larger blocks into smaller blocks to allow that pedestrian level of space. Treating drives, internal drives to the development more like streetscapes or pedestrian alleyways that have trees along it and sidewalks along it. And we also want to encourage a mix of uses. So, in this scenario, we could potentially see residential units along Town Park Drive. Clearly the first floor could be more active uses like restaurants. And then next slide, please. So this is really about enhancing the Chastain and the street frontages. So pulling those buildings, like I said, closer to the streets and pushing the parking lot to the middle of the sites. This provides those pedestrian connections into the development areas. Next slide. And again, we talked about sort of carving out public space for these development sites, whether it be mini parks or in some cases, common shared outdoor dining areas. They could also include different amenities like bike parking in those spots as well. Next slide, please. And again, the last one is really about strengthening placemaking and pedestrian activity. So as we said before, pushing out that curb and creating, bike and pedestrian space along the corridor. Again, this would be that sort of really big streetscape moment where we would plant trees and install green infrastructure. Designating the corridor as a pedestrian lighting district would allow for pedestrian scale lighting and pedestrian scale wayfinding. So really, and what we're trying to show is just how a development could be framed in much more of a pedestrian friendly way, encouraging active uses on the first floor of the buildings and carving out spaces for those shared pedestrians in public spaces. Next slide.
I think that's it for the moment.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
Alicia, can you just give us a little recap? I know there have been a couple of questions that have come in through the chat, and I'm hoping maybe we can just kind of recap those for folks that maybe weren't able to see them and answer any outstanding questions that we have.
Sure. I had a couple conversations going on with Bill Owens. He's a PE in the area, and he's been actually working with KSU on some additional studies, I guess you could say, about transit along Chastain. And he was just making sure that we were aware of what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something I'm going to be talking with him offline and getting some more information on what they've been looking at.
Okay, great. And I know there was another question earlier on too about the diverging diamond at 575 and the early off ramp. And those are, one thing I neglected to say at that point was that those are not necessarily mutually exclusive projects, and they could be done simultaneously. They could be done one after the other. There's ways to make them both work together. So it doesn't have to be an either or option, but those are two different ways to create some improvements at that location there. Any other questions at this point in time before we move on? Please don't hesitate to let us know if you have some questions. I know we've gone over quite a bit of material here today in a number of different categories. And like I said, this is really just kind of a synopsis of some of the recommendations we'll be exploring in a little bit more detail as we move forward with our draft report and finalizing that.
And we have one more question, Erin.
Okay.
It says, how much of the urban design recommendations are based upon actual land economics in a suburban environment versus urban design wish lists?
We have, as part of this study, we did conduct a market analysis as well. We have SB Friedman as part of our project team, along with Metro Analytics and Gresham Smith, and they were really focused less on the economics of the urban design side of things, as more thinking about the current conditions within the Chastain Road corridor and the potential for redevelopment along the corridor, and thinking about what kinds of uses are suitable for this area based on the economics. So I think it's it's a combination, and Erin, maybe you can speak to this a little bit as well, but there are a number of these types of strategies that really do help drive pedestrian activity and generate more activity at businesses along a corridor when you can provide space for people and have some public open spaces. And I think another big consideration is sort of the changing public realm that we're all dealing with right now in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, and just thinking through how we use public space and the types of activities that people are doing more. And we're seeing across the country, more people seeking outdoor dining opportunities, and you've seen parks in different cities actually carving out 6-foot or 10-foot circles of spaces for people. So I think that all of that is shifting quite a bit these days, but we are trying to come up with things that are not just simply wish lists, but that have some proven success rates in terms of generating pedestrian activity and supporting the businesses that are along a corridor.
Yeah, that's right. And I'll just also jump in and say too that what we're trying to do is create, a scenario where people don't just drive into one location and then leave, but that they are encouraged to wander around the corridor, whether it's going from breakfast to a farmer's market or to a movie later, setting up a place where people come and stay as a destination and walk around and explore other businesses instead of just going to one and leaving. So that's really why the emphasis is on this sort of pedestrian accessibility.
Any other questions at the moment?
There is one. It's come in. It says, if recommendations are accepted by the county, what would be the process for implementation?
Well, Alicia, I'll let you talk about that a little bit, but I think it's a combination of things. Part of it is identifying funding for the recommendations and improvements. Intersection improvements could potentially get funding through the Atlanta Regional Commission or through other sources. And of course, the redevelopment scenarios would be largely dependent on collaboration between developers and property owners, and thinking about finding those willing partners who can work with the CID to try to create this kind of an environment. Some of the recommendations can be implemented as standalone projects on their own, and we are looking at developing a phasing plan or kind of an implementation strategy that will include short-term and longer-term improvements that can be done over time, that will kind of piece by piece start to knit together this overall vision. As far as the small area policy guidelines, I think that's another process that comes after the conclusion of the corridor study itself. And the intent there was, for working with Cobb County, was to have a way that we can encourage these types of improvements and reconfiguration potentially of spaces and buildings like what you're seeing on the screen here, in a way that, again, is not an overlay district, that isn't regulatory, that's not setting a prescriptive standard for exactly how things need to be done, but kind of providing those guidelines that can be taken into consideration as applications for redevelopment or new projects come online.
I think you hit the nail on the head with that. I mean, there's a process that we have to go through for sure once the county is on board with some of the improvements and the implementation. It's definitely based on funding availability, future partners, what can happen, just economics in general, what's happening in the area, growth of KSU, traffic. So there's a lot of different things you have to weigh as far as moving forward with implementation. One of the goals for the CID is to look at some of the smaller bite-sized projects that we can take care of quicker now than waiting for funding partners. So that's something that we balance and we look at. But for sure, the high level that Gresham Smith is looking at right now, each of these actually different pieces of this study might come out as smaller projects to really go in and do a deeper dive and to see what can happen for a project itself. So there's definitely more information that would need to be gathered, but we'll just have to see what's available and what kind of support we have from county, state, federal levels, that sort of thing, and as well as community as far as moving things forward.
And I would say that it's also important to note that these aren't, it's not an all or nothing. You know, we're trying to identify a series of potential projects. It's almost like a menu of options in a lot of ways. You don't have to do intersection improvements at all 13 locations. You don't have to, create each and every one of these things that we've talked about, but they can kind of be layered on to each other and applied in select locations. You can start with some of the lower hanging fruit, some of the pedestrian signal improvements, for example, or some of the smaller scale projects. And then as, priorities shift and according to available funding, other things can be added on. So it's not as if there's going to be one project cost that says it's X millions of dollars to implement the entirety of this plan and that's it. We really wanted to create a series of improvements that can be kind of layered onto one another.
Okay, and then we have a question. Is the funding for this project from SPLOST? And I can answer that. No, it is not. There are no, this was completely funded by ARC and the Town Center CID. So there's no SPLOST funds involved in this. But we have definitely worked with the county to make sure some of the recommendations that Gresham Smith was putting forward, that was something that worked in conjunction with their requirements and standards and regulations in the county itself. Another one, we have a comment. And it says, going back to urban design, I'm having a hard time seeing this occur in such a suburban environment that was developed fairly recently. This isn't an old area where you see these most likely to occur. These are newer buildings and the cost will be too high to allow this type of transformation to happen. Would either of you like to address that?
Sure, I'll talk to that a little bit. Again, I think that what we're doing is trying to set the stage for this to happen as redevelopment occurs over time. So at some point, some of these buildings, there are several properties along Chastain Road that are that have vacancies, and it's not something that we're trying to suggest needs to be addressed immediately, but we want to just provide the foundation for those ideas so that if and as redevelopment occurs, then these are kind of some guidelines about how to make that happen in a way that helps work toward that long-term vision. This is not something that's meant to be in the next 5 years or even 10 years necessarily, but something that can kind of take shape over time.
I think I'd like to add to that
Please.
Everything that is on the west side of 575 is part of this plan, falls inside the Regional Activity Center. And the CID is one of the two major or only regional activity centers in Cobb County. So this type of development is what you're seeing in other regional activity centers, not only in Cobb County, but across Metro Atlanta and the state, as well as in a number of suburban areas. And a lot of the benchmarking that Erin and her team have done have really been looking at mixed use developments that are popping up in more suburban environments. And so this is just one idea. It's definitely not anything that we have carved into stone, but this is where you are able to dream big and see where future land use is going, as well as future redevelopment opportunities throughout the district.
think we have a couple more questions, but I do want to be mindful of the time. So what I'd like to do maybe as we move to the kind of interactive question real quick, we'd like to just get a quick take, quick pulse about what people are excited about or what people think has the most potential to kind of benefit the corridor and move things forward. And then we can take a couple more questions. We still have a few minutes left. We'll just talk briefly about kind of our next steps as we aim to wrap up the study. So for anyone that does have a smartphone or another tablet available, if you go to www.menti.com and then enter the code 6331020, you should see that at the top of your screen right here. And then it will prompt you to enter ideas that you are most excited about. So what are the things that you think will have a positive impact on the future of Chastain Road? And you can enter multiple responses, I should say, too. So we're seeing improved safety for pedestrians and bikers, safer crosswalks, campus kiosk, walking paths, smart technology, more foot traffic. Some excitement about the DDI, charging stations and Wi-Fi. We've got 9 or 10 responses so far. And when we post the slide presentation, we'll make sure to include these responses here as well. Adjusting the timing rather of traffic signals, lighted crosswalks, we've got a few more responses still coming in. We're up to 14. Multi-use path and interactive signage, the redevelopment of businesses, the early off-ramp. It's great. I'm glad to see that people are responding to some of these ideas and that there's some things that really resonate with people. I think that's that's really positive. We'll just give another minute here for folks to put in some more responses. One of the questions that I see here is about how will some of these enhancements help ease current parking challenges at some of the retail establishments along the corridor? And I think there's a couple of ways that might be playing out. One is some of the more intense redevelopment that could potentially happen long-term in the future, might require more parking depending on what those uses are. But at the same time, there's also a hope and an expectation that by encouraging more walkability, as Erin was speaking to earlier, that you'll have the opportunity to kind of park once and then walk to multiple different destinations. So at some point we could see, perhaps some shared parking, or maybe even just fewer people driving to that central town park area altogether, if they're able to get there safely and easily on bikes or on foot, whether it's from campus or from other destinations to the south. And I think as time goes on, we'll see maybe an increased likelihood of people really using bikes and walking to get to and from the different businesses. Alicia or Erin, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think you've got it. Absolutely. And there was one question that I typed a response to, and someone was asking about, have we seen a change in vacancies with Class A office space and retail space due to COVID? And I just wanted to hit on that real quick, that we haven't seen a change in numbers at this point. I think it's still a little too early to see that because a lot of people are working from home, especially in office. But we expect harder numbers to come out kind of into fall and into winter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there's a comment here. It's not a question. Talking about transit usage is down, and it has been since pre-COVID.
Mm. Yeah, and I think it's, as you were saying with the office space, it's too early to know the exact long-term impacts. I think that is something that we're seeing in a number of different locations. I think we've heard similar reports from agencies, across the country. I think it's difficult to predict what's going to happen, as we, work our way through the pandemic. I think although we are seeing maybe a decline in transit ridership, there's not as much, currently there's not transit that operates along most of Chastain Road. There is bus service for campus that crosses Chastain Road. Of course, there's regional commuter bus traffic that through Greta that serves the area as well. But I think we are seeing an increase in people walking and biking in a lot of locations and accessing regional public spaces and parks and trails and other outdoor amenities, maybe more so than we were. And I don't have concrete numbers on that. I think that, we're certainly, national parks and some of the other destination type locations have reported increased visitors and people coming to them as a place to get together with folks outdoors. But I think it's kind of a wait and see right now. It's hard to predict, what that's going to look like. So just as we close up here, there's a few minutes left in the meeting. We can see if there's other questions that come in, but I do want to direct everyone to the Town Center CID website. There's the web address is displayed on the screen right now. If you go to towncentercid.com, there's a section for studies, and you'll see some information about the Chastain Road LCI corridor study. And we'll put a copy of this presentation as well as a recording of today's meeting on the website for you all to come back to and take a look at or share with your friends and colleagues. And our team internally will be working to refine these draft recommendations and put together our draft report. And then we're also starting to work with the CID to set the stage for a demonstration project, kind of a short-term temporary implementation project that can showcase some of the strategies that we talked about today and really start to help build momentum for some longer-term potential changes along Chastain Road. Alicia, would you like to close it out?
Sure. I'd like to thank everyone for attending and watching and looking at the recommendations that Gresham Smith has worked really hard on gathering information and developing. We appreciate any comments and feedback as always. So you can reach me via email as well as Erin, or also via phone. That's fine as well. Because whenever we get any sort of comments or information, we're sure to log everything that we receive so that we have this in our final summary. And that's about it. Erin, Megha, thank you so much to you and your team for what y'all have done for us. And we look forward to wrapping this project up in the report. And once it's complete, it'll be done by the end of the year. We'll have that final version published on the website for everyone to view. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.